Let me just say, as a way of preface, that the goal here is to think about, well, we won't experience much of it today, but to think about communal discernment as a way of seeking together the spirit that underlies us all, that undergirds us all, that it's at the heart of us all, that we don't often hear because we're thinking about our own experience. So it's to say, there's a theological perspective here that God is at the center of all things, that God is holding everything up, that God is at the center of all things, at our deepest selves, and that's the same spirit that all of us share, but because we're all listening through the lens of our own experience, there's a mixed metaphor. We're seeing God through the lens of mixed, we're hearing through ears that are trained by different experiences. We don't always listen or don't always hear that spirit in the same kind of way, and we certainly don't respond to that spirit in the same way. So that's to say communal discernment is listening for, hearing, and responding to the spirit that unifies us all. So that another way of saying it is whenever there's a conflict, it's because we're not listening to the spirit, because we're insisting that my spirit, the voice that I hear, is the accurate one instead of looking more deeply. Okay, so what I would like to do now is just give you a brief presentation about leading communal discernment. And I want to talk about this in terms of stages. And I'll talk about 5 stages. What are the prerequisites for communal discernment, which is something that I think...
Sorry.
We okay?
Yeah, I'm going to mute here.
Okay. What are the prerequisites that are necessary for any kind of a process like this? Or I should say, under ideal circumstances, what are the prerequisites? Then, in terms of the process itself, I think there's 3 stages. The first one are the preliminary preparations that need to be in place before you begin. The third is the process itself. It's the day or the concentrated period of days when the discernment happens. And then the last part of this, the last stage, includes confirmation and evaluation. So what I want to do is go through each of these 5 points and explain what they have in mind, what I have in mind with them. I hope this graphic helps a little bit. Say that the prerequisites need to be there throughout the entire period, and they are things which can change over time, and you can keep adding to them to add to the base of the prerequisites, so that the group will get better as time goes on, because the prerequisites kind of emerge a little bit more, or they become clearer to everyone, and everyone has a chance to act on them. Then I put the 3 stages there with the preliminary preparation, the process itself, and then the follow-up, which includes confirmation and evaluation. So the prerequisites, you could go on and on and on making a list. What I tried to do is be inclusive without being too compulsive about the whole thing. So let me just say some things which I think, oh, sorry about that. What the, yeah, the points. I think first you have to believe in the process. You have to believe in communal discernment. You have to believe that God is present with us, that God is with us right now, that we're standing on holy ground, that God's trying to communicate to us, that God hears our prayers and wants to respond to them, that God wants to bless the process, and that God will speak through the process and all the people who are taking part in it. Now, does that mean you have to be a fervent, believing Catholic Christian in order to do communal discernment? No, it doesn't mean that. But it does mean you have to believe in a higher power that brings us all together, that you have to believe that there is some force somewhere, somehow, that gives us unity and wants to move in us. So you don't have to have the same explicit faith in order for this to work, but you do have to believe many of the same kinds of things. A dimension which I think is extremely important is freedom. And in the Ignatian sense, there's freedom from and freedom for. Freedom from sin, freedom from disordered attachments, freedom from doubt, freedom from fear, freedom from preconditioned notions, freedom from many of the things which I think you experienced when you were climbing Mount Everest. You know, freedom is just, let's go ahead and make fools of ourselves. As I think about, you know, how bad I am at clicking on these things or whatever these are, I just have to say, it is what it is. And so let's just go with it. Freedom from hidden agendas. You have to be able to talk to each other. And maybe the biggest freedom is the freedom from debating. The freedom from thinking that I have the answer and I just have to convince these other people to believe what I believe and everything will be fine. So there's freedom from constraints and freedom for what? Freedom for response, freedom for moving, freedom for listening, freedom for generous service, freedom for commitment to what comes forward. Perhaps the biggest freedom is one that you talked about in the affirmative
appreciative inquiry.
Yeah, that's it. I always mess up the name. In that process, you dream. So you get out of the preconceived notions and out of the boxes, and you open yourself up to be more in line with what God has in mind, and you appreciate what's been given, and you move in that direction. So it's freedom also for doing something concrete. Because we have to be freed from fantasy, because this freedom to dream is not the same as imagining myself into an alternate reality. We have to deal with the world that we have. And so part of the freedom is to enter with objectivity and balance and commitment into the world in which we live. It's also freedom to listen to others and to believe that God might be working through them. I think this comes clear to me. I was talking to a man once who he was a judge in the federal court system of the United States, and his pet hobby was to go to the car races, where people of his level of his class, his socioeconomic level never go. And he said, I love to go there because I see a side of America that none of my colleagues ever see. And their votes count just as much as my vote counts when we go to the polling station. So it's freedom for being one with others. This process requires a great deal of generosity. It means self-sacrifice, it means giving, it means long hours of work, it means the hard work of listening, it means the hard work of being humble and admitting that I don't know everything, that I depend on others, that I need to be engaged with others. A fourth prerequisite is a kind of union of hearts and sometimes of minds, but it's a communion of purpose. We're saying we're in this together, we're going to trust one another because we're in this together. And perhaps the most important dimension of this communion that I hope that I mention again and again during this is that everyone has to be committed to implementing the decision. You can't go into a communal discernment saying, I will go along with everybody if I like the way we get to the results. You can't, it's not like the US election this time around, where I believe it's a good election if I win, otherwise it was rigged. That just doesn't work. Everybody has to be committed to implementing the decision, whatever it is. Okay, this takes time. It takes personal time because you have to pray and think before the actual day in which the discernment happens. You have to certainly give people time and your respectful attention during the day. You have to be patient because God does things on a much different time frame than we do. So there's a big commitment of time that's there. And the time doesn't end with the time commitment does not end when you finish the day of discernment. It continues for a long time afterwards because you have to live into confirmation and evaluation. Everybody who takes part has to have a certain amount of knowledge. They have to know how the process works. You can't surprise people and just say, well, trust me, it'll work out just fine. They need to know what they're in for. They need to know about discernment of spirits. They need to know how to discern them in their own lives, or at least to have some idea of how to do that. They need to know how to work in a group process as far as how to listen carefully, how to, I explained to a group one time, you have to make I statements. I think this, I think that, I believe this, I hope this, rather than saying, trying to and do anything else. You have to talk about what's going on in me, rather than what we need to do is this, or what you should be doing is this. This is what I think. Everyone has to know when they come into the room what they think the answer is. You have to be willing to change and willing to listen to what other people have to say, but you have to have gone through this and prayed about it and thought about it ahead of time, so that, excuse me, you're not, it's not fair to say, I agree with Charles, or what Sandra said makes good sense to me. This is a case where I have to say, I think this, and I'm ready to go with it. And just to make sure that everybody is committed, it's really important to make it clear from the beginning that we are all in this together and we're all committed to implementing what the group decides, in whatever way that it decides, because sometimes the group decides not to decide, and everybody has to be comfortable with that also. Okay, those are the prerequisites. As you can see on the little schema that I made, they need to continue and be there through the whole process, from what we might call the beginning to the end. Those prerequisites deepen over time, and that's a really important thing, but there does need to be a bedrock on which the process is built. So for getting the process underway, let me suggest that there are these three things which I think are really key and important. First, everybody has to have all the pertinent information. So in the case that I gave you about the Sisters of Saint Scholastica, it's not fair for the treasurer to say, well, I can't tell you how much we're going to get for the building, or I can't tell you how much it's going to cost because we don't know yet. Everybody has to know all the details. Nobody can hold their cards back and say, well, this is privileged information. If it's privileged information, it needs to be privileged within the group. If it's pertinent to everything. And not everybody needs to know everything about everything, but everybody needs to know the pertinent information. It has to be distributed to everyone. So you can't say, well, the general council can know, but you other people who are going to join us, you don't get to know. Or you lay people, you don't get to know what's going on. Or the Father Chaplain gets to know, but other people don't get to know. No, everybody has to have the information. People have to have a chance to clarify it, and they have to have a chance to study it and know exactly what's going on. Then you have to have a proposal that is carefully formulated. It has to be something that's real, something that's important, something that's concrete, and something that can actually happen. You need to be able to say who's going to do it and when they're going to do it by, and some of those kinds of things. So in the suggestion or in the case that I gave you, Mother General needs to say, by such and such a date, we will move the novitiate to Nairobi, and these people will be involved in the process, and it's going to be really concrete and specific so that people can pray about whether or not they think that's a good idea. These proposals need to be kind of in black and white, yes and no situations. Obviously, there's going to be nuances, but it has to be a proposal that's concrete, not kind of general, up in the air. Well, we might do this, but then if that doesn't work, we might do that, and then we might do this other thing if that works out. People need to have something concrete that they're looking at. Then the last thing, which is crucial throughout the whole process, and which I tried to emphasize last time when I talked about discernment, prayer has to be there. There has to be the personal prayer of the people who are involved. They have to have taken time to pray about the matter and to have discerned it personally with a spiritual director, if possible, but to have asked, what are the spirits that are moving me? And what does God seem to be saying to me about this? And they need to have a personal list of the reasons for the proposal and against the proposal before they come into the room. So everybody has to come in with a piece of paper, unless you have way better memory than I have, and you know what the reasons are before you come into the room. But it's better to have them written down so that you can just read them rather than being tempted to say, oh, I'm with Pauline. Whatever David said, that's what I believe. No, I have to say what I think about the proposal, giving the reasons against and for. Okay, so we've got the prerequisites in place. We've done the preliminary preparation. Now we'll turn to the process, which is in the, we kind of gather for a day, at least to get it started. So it's really important to pray for light, to pray for the presence of the Holy Spirit, to pray that God bless the meeting. It's really good to do this in a concrete, specific way in which everyone feels together, unified as they pray. Then, depending on whether you've got a small group of, say, the General Council of the Sisters of St. Scholastica, or perhaps a bigger team, if it's an extended consult, you'll need to break into small groups of maybe 5 or 6 people. You don't want to have too many people in each group. That, of course, is going to change how the dynamic goes, but in general, once you're in your group, then you state all the reasons against the proposal. Psychologically, there seems to be a reason that we just have to get the negative things out of our system right away. So do that, but this is done without debate. It's just to list things. It's just to say, this is what came up in my prayer and my discernment when I was thinking about this. These are the reasons against. And then, so kind of in silence, although you can ask for clarification, but in general, you just, in a receptive, prayerful way, receive what people have said, listen to it, take notes if you want to, go around the room until everyone has had a chance to say all the reasons on his or her list of the cons, the reasons against. Then at the end, take a moment to pray in a summary way, personally. Everybody in the group takes time to pray for what the cons are for them, what kind of merges for them, where are they now. Then it's good to take a break. Usually at this time, it's time to get some coffee or to refuel, whatever you have to do, and then come back again. And this time you do a similar thing of stating the pros. What are the reasons in favor of this proposal? The people who proposed it are good people. They had good ideas. And so we can assume that they're going to probably be stronger for everyone. But in any case, listen to all the pros. So at the end of that period, the person who's a leader in the group can say, do we have consensus? Because very often, after all the cons and pros have been stated, it's clear to everybody in the group, let's go for it. at which point you go to the prayer at the end, the prayer of thanksgiving, and you're done. But human beings, being who we are, sometimes we're not ready yet to agree. So we shift to a prayer to summarize the pros. Everyone takes the time to kind of bring together what they were thinking about. We may share a little bit. We may engage in some kind of a process. But after stating the pros, sometimes then people are ready with a consensus. And so you ask the question again, do we have a consensus? After having, examined everything together, if there's yes, you go right to the end and you have a prayer of thanksgiving. If it's a no, then you have to do some kind of a communal evaluation. There are all kinds of different ways in which to do this. Some of them involve listening once again to the small groups. If you have a number of small groups, you all listen to what everybody else has said. Sometimes you can take a vote, and that's a way to do it. Sometimes you can break into a fishbowl and people get a chance to express a little bit more what they have in mind. But you want to avoid debate. You never want to get into an argument, because we're seeking the spirit which is in the hearts of each one of us. And we were asking that spirit to emerge and be clear and obvious to us. Jesuits at this point frequently, if they're not ready, if it's not kind of a unanimity to say yes, then they'll say we'll have a small group with one person from each of the administrative units of the society, and they will decide for us. They'll continue to the discernment without us. Or sometimes you just say we're going to have a vote. So for example, we have a vote to elect the general, saying that no matter who it is, we all agree that this is the one that God has chosen for us, and so we're going to be happy with that. Okay, at the end of this, all of these things, you get to, and excuse me, sometimes you might say, we're not ready to make a decision. This is too conflicted. Some things came up that we hadn't thought about. We need to go back to the drawing board and start over. But again, you have a moment in which the whole group says, yes, this is where we want to be. So then you go to the Thanksgiving. Then we come to the last two stages, which come after the prayer of thanksgiving, and they're really important also. First off, a decision is confirmed in experience. Just because we decided this doesn't mean that it's a good idea in the practicality of it all. So we have to say, when is this going to be implemented by? Who's going to implement it? There has to be kind of an action step plan in place. And then we have to say, how are we going to decide, how are we going to evaluate this decision? What are the criteria for evaluating it? And when does everything have to be in place for deciding that this was a good idea? And I mentioned who's responsible and who's going to communicate the results of this confirmation to everyone. So what I'm saying is this needs to not float off into the future, but it needs to remain concrete and incarnate, because this is the chance for the spirits to be incarnate in our midst, and we need to depend on that. Then some other time, perhaps at the end of the meeting, but perhaps later, there has to be a time of evaluation, it seems to me. What went well? It's a kind of an examen. What went well, and what might we recommend doing differently the next time we do this? So this is really crucial and important. And so let me then stop sharing my screen. Yes, Orietta, I think your point is a really important, is a key one. There's a kind of euphoria that comes at the end of the process, because everybody has worked really hard. everybody has been together, and there is a way in which the Spirit is palpable in our midst. And in a process like that, that's well prepared, and that everyone has been really generous in giving themselves to the process. But sometimes that sense of euphoria can be so overwhelming that we forget that it takes time for that to be confirmed and experienced. And so that's where the waiting a little while to for the confirmation is really important, because the euphoria can take us to a certain point, but then the cold reality of going home and trying to make it happen in our communities is not always easy. Charles asks if the cons should always be expressed first. Well, you know, they say don't ever say always, but I would say yes. They need to be expressed first, because it's good to get the negativity out of your system. Another thing that I should mention, the importance of the group swinging together, so that when you're working on the cons, it is the responsibility of everyone in the group to give the reasons why this is not a good idea, and not to debate, but everyone needs to give those reasons. So let me give you an example. During the general congregation, we came to a point where people wanted to begin, some people wanted to begin the process of election for the general right away. So we need a general right away so that we can get going. And others say, we're saying we need more time to get to know the people who are here. And I was concerned lest there be a split in the group, because everyone was coming to me and telling me what they thought, but I wasn't sure that everyone was hearing all the reasons that everybody got together. So we had a session in which I said, we're going to discern this together. And so first, let's hear all the reasons for proceeding right away. What are all the reasons for proceeding right away? Whether you believe that that's a good idea or not, what are the positive, rational reasons that you want to suggest? You can't debate, but it's really important for both those who think it's a good idea and those who don't think it's a good idea to express themselves now with what are those reasons. And then after that was all over, we took a little break, took a breather. You've heard everybody. Now we'll take all the other reasons. And you can't debate, you just state the reasons. Then after everybody had heard from everybody, I said, now we take a moment. What's the Spirit saying to us at this point? And it was remarkable how the vote changed, because at the beginning I had said how many are in favor and how many are against. And there were a lot more people who wanted to move right along than there were who wanted to wait. But there was a big enough group who didn't want to feel bulldozed and needed time. And when all those reasons were expressed, the other part of the group, those who wanted to move along, said very easily, very calmly, very patiently, very quietly, we'll go along with what you've said. So there was a huge change in the way the vote happened. But part of it is because you get all the cons out of the way together. Okay, so Marcus, Pablo's going to send you the PowerPoint, so I think you'll be all set. Rather than me trying to try and do it now. It's beyond me. Sorry. Okay, Shanti, good, thank you. Glad you like the prerequisites. Oh, Eulalia, you're so right. We don't get enough information because knowledge is power, right? And it's really tempting to not give out all the power. And we have good reasons for not doing it. We don't want to share the bottom line, the bank book with everybody. We don't want them to know how much money we have because some people are tempted to spend it. So we don't want to give all the information. But you have to. But it's also a way of inviting everyone into the confidentiality. when you say, we are sharing this information, but only with you, not with everyone in your house, or everyone that you work with, or everyone, or with the newspapers, that brings everybody in a way that commits them even more strongly to what's happening. So there's a good thing that happens here. So to mention the things about confirmation again, you need to determine a period for implementation. How long do you need to get this program off the ground? It's not fair to implement, to evaluate, to expect the program to work perfectly right from the beginning. You need to have a little time for the bugs to get worked out, to kind of whether it's going to be confirmed or not. Then you need to know what the criteria for evaluation are. So someone has to figure that out. Even if the group says, we want Sandra to figure out the criteria for evaluation, that's a valid way to do it. The group does not have to make all the decisions, but it has to make it possible for someone to do that. They have to empower someone. Usually, Jesuits always say, Father General is going to be the one that's responsible for this. Or sometimes they'll say the procurator is going to responsible. The treasurer's office will be responsible for this, but you need to indicate someone. And that person has to also be ready to communicate the results. Okay. Do you need an?
I have a question, and Vernon has two.
Vernon has two. Okay. Let's go with Teresa. Do you have to have an external facilitator? It depends. If you have a small group and someone is in the group who's competent, then everyone trusts, you don't need an external person. Sometimes it helps just because an external facilitator is an expert who tells you what you already know and what you want to hear. So sometimes that's very helpful. It takes the pressure off someone a lot of times, because certainly if it's say the case I gave you was Mother General and her council, it would probably be helpful to have an outside person, because those people are so busy, so used to working with each other, they don't always get to say all the things that they have in mind. Sometimes then an external facilitator is really helpful. But you have the difficulty, a lot of times they don't know much about your group and they're not very helpful. That doesn't help you either. So, Vernon, if you could, it'd be better if you wrote your questions, because then everybody can see them, and we don't have any problem with accents. Okay. Oh, Fratern, you asked the most difficult questions. Has the decision already been made? Isn't that often the case? And that's something really to be avoided. Since the Mother General had just been elected, I don't think she probably had. It's a good idea that she has. It may be a pet project of hers, but I think she's willing to listen to the rest of the group and to hear what they have to say. And it's important for her council to straighten her out right from the beginning, to remind her that she does not have all the power in the world, that she has to listen, that just because she was elected doesn't mean that she has a special conduit to the Holy Spirit. And but I think it's good to ask her if the decision was made, because that kind of honesty is really important in a situation like this. Can I say a few words about tension between setting a time for making the decision and remaining open to the Spirit? Sometimes deadlines feel like they're rushing the process. Yes, that's right. But sometimes it's really helpful to be rushed. I mean, to be I don't want to say pushed. I don't want to say guided, but to be hemmed in a little bit, to be embraced. But you certainly have to give time, and that's an important part of setting up the process to give people the time to say the things that they need to say. But if everybody has already prayed about the material and everybody has already worked through it in a prayerful, discerning way so that they come with their lists, it takes much less time than you would imagine. So this is a case where the time spent ahead of time helps the process unfold in a kind of organic way, and people don't feel rushed. They feel as though they're part of a flow. That's a better word, to say that you're part of a flow that's bringing people along with you. Okay, who does the proposing? It depends on the organization. Sometimes grassroots people have a good idea that they bring to managers and say, we'd like to work on this particular project. But I think more often we're used to doing what the bosses, the they people have to say. But anybody can. The proposal can come from a different, all kinds of different people. It's just it's how the organization is composed to figure out who's going to organize it and how are they going to make it happen. So a group can get together and in the course of a conversation say, we need to pray, we need to discern this, we need to work on this, how are we going to do it, and then divide up the work so that it can be done. I think in general, it's usually a small group that does the proposing, and they've worked it through. Just because today, today we work together better in groups than in the bad old days of Father Ledahovsky, when he decided everything in his office down the hall from where Charles is now, and it's just different. Okay, so Vernon, what happens if the participants don't have the necessary prerequisites? Then you probably won't have a successful outcome. The Spirit can make up for a lot of our inadequacies, but it just makes it tougher. So the more you can do, can have the prerequisites in place ahead of time, the easier the process will be. Does the group always have to make the final decision? No, it doesn't have to. Very often, the group provides all kinds of very helpful input for the Superior General to make a decision. Or sometimes it's clear that the group isn't ready to make a decision. Maybe it didn't have enough information, or maybe, Sandra, to come back to your point, the rooms were only booked for a certain amount of time, and everybody has to fly home, so we have to stop. So in those kinds of cases, it makes, I think very often the group will say, we give this to a group, to this particular group, but they have to say who the group is, or they have to say we give this to Father General for him to take care of. When the General Congregation 35 ended, the decrees were not yet in final form, and the congregation said we give charge to this to Father General's Council, and they will decide what the final texts will be. So the group can do that. Okay. Jacques, no, this is, your question's a good one because it's a complicated one. I have my own personal listening to the Spirit, and I have to listen to the Spirit as the Spirit is revealed in the group. So I'm kind of have to, have to be bipolar for a minute, or bifurcated. So the Spirit's saying this to me, but as I'm listening to the group, the Spirit's saying this to me. So, for example, in the example I gave you about the General Congregation, the Spirit was telling me, let's get this over with. We're ready to go. And that was really strong. But then when I heard everybody else, I said, no, I've been too anxious. That spirit that I thought was me, clearly there's another voice here and that I want to respect. It's a minority voice because there were fewer people who wanted to wait. But when they gave their reasons for why they wanted to wait, everybody else said, that's fine with us. We want to respect the spirit that's strong in you, and we will go with what you want to say. Even though we're ready, and we think the spirit thinks we're ready, we will go with what you have to say. At what point in the process do people have to share the rationale behind their pros and cons? Often they don't have to give the rationale. Only if there's a blockage and the decision doesn't unfold easily. In that period where I talked about the communal, the third stage, that would be a time when people could give their reasons, and that might help break the logjam and help people make a decision more easily. Okay, is there more of a decision than a discernment? So this is to do with the case. Yes, the decision, it seems to me, needs to be based on a discernment. So in one way you could say that the proposal is the decision, and the discernment is about whether this is confirmed or not. So your question's a really good one, because the people, like the novice director really needs to be involved in the decision. The person who's in charge of formation needs to be in on this, or to have provided some input, because you don't want to make a decision. You don't want to come to a decision that you haven't depended upon the expertise of people. So for example, the director of novices doesn't have to be part of the discernment, but her opinion would be really important. She should write saying what she thinks and for what reasons, because that's a crucial part of this. But she shouldn't be the one who gets the final word either, because she's just got her part. So if I were one of those nuns, I think if I were Mother General, I would want the novice master to be there with the group. That's how I would want to do the discernment. But it's not necessary to do it that way. And so it can be done in many different kinds of ways. Flavio, people usually don't easily accept a proposal coming. Oh, isn't that the truth? You just have to get people to be honest. And if they've had a few experiences of what happens when they're not honest, then they'll learn how to be honest. But one of the prerequisites is we have to trust one another. And so sometimes you have to work on changing the culture of your group before you can do a discernment. So in my community, for example, of 70 people who weren't used to doing discernment, I knew that we had to do faith sharing for a while before we could get to a level of discernment. Now, one of the things that surprised me was that I found out the group was much more trusting and much more ready to do discernment than I realized. So it was I made a mistake. I misread the group. So we're at a really good place now, as far as I'm concerned, for this kind of a thing. But yes, you're right. You need to do some kind of a process ahead of time so that people can do what needs to be done. Okay. How do you undo a discernment? How are we doing on time? Oh, we're done. Let's see.
There's a final question that just came up.
Okay. So I'll try and be brief about these last two. What do we do with discernment that has to deal with past decisions that created division and suffering? And now we have to somehow undo the decision, but the group is still divided and revengeful. And so a discernment would be perfect, but especially when you work on the preconditions. What do we need to do for healing? And how do we kind of say, okay, we made this decision. It was not confirmed in experience. So we need to return and re-pray about this. So it's a chance to go back and do things again. I think you need to take advantage of that situation. Okay, the process of discernment with yes and conclude with a prayer. Yes, it is possible to end with a no. And in fact, sometimes that's a really, it becomes clear to everyone right away that no is the correct answer. And it can be quite as spontaneous as a yes. That's just fine. But the process ends by saying, thank you, Lord, for making your will clear to us through this group as we worked together. So it's a confirmation. The confirmation is of what the group has said, and that's where the thanksgiving is, that we listened carefully to one another and we came to this decision. So yes, exactly. Thank you for mentioning that.